The ballroom of the Grand Meridian glittered like a chandelier made of stars. Crystal lights shimmered against marble floors. White roses lined the aisle, and a quartet played something soft and expensive. Guests in tailored suits and silk gowns laughed gently into glasses of champagne, and near the back of the room, standing slightly apart from the golden glow, was Thomas Hale. His suit was simple, well-pressed but old, the kind of suit that had attended job interviews, funerals, parent-teacher meetings, and now his daughter's wedding. He checked his watch even though he didn't need to. He had been early. He was always early. From where he stood, he could see her. Emily, his little girl. She was radiant, draped in lace and satin, her hair pinned elegantly, diamonds sparkling at her ears. The room admired her beauty. Thomas saw something else. He saw the tiny newborn wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. He saw the toddler who refused to sleep unless her hand was wrapped around his finger. He saw the 6-year-old girl standing at the window the night her mother left. That night had smelled like rain and silence. "I can't do this anymore," her mother had said, suitcase already packed. "I need more than this life, more than this life, more than him." Thomas had stood in the doorway holding Emily, who didn't understand why Mommy wasn't coming back after work. And from that moment on, he became everything. Mother, father, comfort, discipline, safety. He learned how to braid hair from online videos. Burned the first 3 attempts, succeeded on the 4th. He worked 2 jobs, mechanic by day, warehouse supervisor by night. There were weeks when sleep felt like a rumor. He would come home exhausted, but when Emily ran into his arms shouting, "Daddy," the weight of the world loosened its grip. He never told her how tight money was. When she wanted ballet lessons, he sold his watch, the one his own father had given him. When she needed a new laptop for school, he canceled the only vacation he'd ever planned for himself. When she cried because other kids had bigger houses, he told her, "One day you'll build whatever house you want." And he meant it. He never remarried, not because he couldn't, but because every time someone new came close, he saw Emily's small face watching carefully, afraid she would be replaced. So he chose her every time. For years she chose him too. She used to leave little notes in his lunchbox. "You're my hero. Best dad ever. When I get married, you'll walk me down the aisle." He kept every note, folded carefully, stored in a tin box in his closet. But somewhere along the way, the world grew louder. High school changed things. Emily began noticing brands, cars, vacations, country clubs. She started comparing. Other fathers wore tailored suits. Other fathers drove imported cars. Other fathers didn't smell faintly of motor oil. Thomas noticed the subtle shifts, the way she stopped introducing him as "my dad" and started saying "this is Thomas," the way she corrected his grammar, the way she asked him not to come to certain events because it's complicated. Still, he never complained. Love to him was endurance. Then came Daniel, handsome, educated abroad, confident in a way only wealth could sculpt. His family owned real estate developments across the state. His father, Richard Lawson, was polished, charismatic, influential. Richard took an immediate interest in Emily. He invited her to galas, helped her network, introduced her as like the daughter I never had. And slowly, subtly, Emily began glowing under that attention. Thomas saw it happening, the distance, the admiration, the way her eyes shone when she spoke about Richard's business advice. "He understands ambition," she once said at dinner. "He knows how the world works." Thomas nodded quietly and passed the salt. What he didn't say was this: years ago, when Richard Lawson's company nearly collapsed during a financial downturn, it was Thomas who had quietly stepped in. Not as a mechanic, but as a silent investor. Before Emily was born, Thomas had started buying small plots of neglected land, cheap at the time, ignored by everyone else. Over decades, he held onto them patiently. When the city expanded, those forgotten lands became prime development sites. Richard had needed capital. Thomas had provided it. No spotlight, no recognition, just a signature and a handshake. Richard built an empire. Thomas returned to his garage. He never told Emily, not when she admired Richard's penthouse, not when she praised his leadership, not when she once said, without malice but with quiet finality, "I just feel like he's the father I always needed." The words hadn't been meant to wound, but they did. Still, Thomas smiled, because love to him was not possession. It was sacrifice. Now, standing in the wedding hall, he watched as Emily laughed with her future father-in-law. Richard stood tall beside her, adjusting his cufflinks, whispering something that made her beam. Thomas felt pride. And something else, a thin crack beneath it. When the wedding coordinator approached him, she asked politely, "Are you ready to walk the bride down the aisle?" He swallowed. "Yes," he said. When Emily reached him, she didn't meet his eyes at first. She was busy fixing her veil. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "Thank you," she replied, distracted, but not unkind. The music swelled. He took her arm for a brief moment, her hand tightened around his, and suddenly she was 6 again. Afraid of thunderstorms, trusting him to keep the monsters away, they walked together under the soft glow of chandeliers. Every step felt like both a beginning and an ending. At the altar, he placed her hand in Daniel's. He stepped back, and as applause filled the room, Thomas Hale allowed himself one fragile hope, that no matter how far she drifted, no matter how much she admired another man's wealth, no matter how loudly the world tried to redefine fatherhood, she would remember who stayed. He did not know yet that before the night ended, that hope would be shattered in front of everyone, and that in his pocket rested a simple envelope, thin, quiet, unassuming, holding the truth of a lifetime. The reception hall shimmered under cascading crystal lights. Laughter rose in polished waves, silverware chimed against fine china, and waiters moved like choreography between tables dressed in ivory and gold. At the center of it all stood Emily, radiant, admired, untouchable. Thomas remained seated at a corner table near a pillar, slightly removed from the center of attention. It wasn't by accident. No one had told him where to sit. A distant cousin had simply gestured vaguely, and he had chosen the quietest place. From there he could see everything, Daniel's hand resting confidently at Emily's waist, Richard Lawson shaking hands with investors even at his son's wedding, the way guests gravitated toward wealth like sunflowers toward the sun. Thomas sipped his water. He didn't drink. Not tonight. He wanted a clear memory of his daughter's wedding day. Even if it hurt, plates were cleared. Music softened, glasses refilled. Then came the gentle tapping of a fork against crystal. Emily stood. The room hushed almost instantly. She looked breathtaking under the spotlight, a bride framed in brilliance. She took the microphone from the band leader and laughed softly as if overwhelmed by joy. "I just want to say something," she began. Her voice was steady, confident. Thomas felt his chest swell. She thanked the guests first, friends, family, colleagues who had flown in from other cities. She thanked Daniel for loving her, the way every woman deserves to be loved. Applause followed. Then she turned toward the head table. Toward Richard, her smile deepened. "And I especially want to thank someone who changed my life." Thomas straightened slightly in his chair. "For guidance, for wisdom, for showing me what strength and leadership truly look like." Richard placed a hand modestly over his chest. The room chuckled warmly. Thomas assumed she was expressing gratitude to her future father-in-law. That was natural. That was polite. Then Emily's eyes moved. They found him. For a brief second, their gazes locked across the hall. He saw no softness there, only something resolved. She raised her glass. "All my life," she said slowly, clearly, "I wanted to have a different father." The sentence landed strangely. A few guests shifted in their seats. Thomas felt the air thin, and finally, she continued, her smile widening, "That dream has come true." The silence that followed was not immediate. It rippled, confused laughter from a few tables, nervous clinking of glasses. Someone coughed. Then Emily turned fully toward Richard Lawson and lifted her glass higher. "To the father I always needed." She stepped forward and embraced him tightly. Richard, surprised but visibly pleased, wrapped his arms around her as the room erupted into scattered applause, hesitant at first, then stronger as social pressure demanded it. Daniel laughed awkwardly and joined the hug. Thomas did not move. His ears rang. The words replayed, not loudly, but precisely. All my life I wanted a different father. He became aware of his own hands resting on the tablecloth. They were steady. That surprised him. At a nearby table, two women whispered, "Isn't that her real father over there? How awful." But no one stood up for him. No one objected. Embarrassment is a quiet thing. It doesn't explode. It seeps. Thomas rose slowly from his chair. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just carefully. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and felt the envelope. It had taken him years to prepare what was inside, not out of anger, out of foresight. He began walking toward the center of the room. Each step felt heavier than the last, but his face remained composed. If anyone had looked closely, they would have seen something extraordinary. He was not angry. He was wounded, and wounded men are often the calmest. The applause faded as people noticed him approaching. Emily released Richard and turned. For a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickered across her face. Thomas stopped in front of her. Up close, she looked younger, fragile beneath the makeup. He held out the envelope. "This is for you," he said quietly. No microphone, no raised voice, just a father speaking to his daughter. She took it casually, almost impatiently. "Thank you," she replied, distracted by the attention still surrounding her. He nodded once. He wanted to say something profound, something fatherly, something forgiving. But words are strange when your heart is splitting open. So he simply said, "I hope you have everything you wished for." There was no sarcasm in it. That made it worse. He stepped back. For a moment, it seemed as if he might return to his seat. Instead, he turned and walked toward the exit. No one stopped him. The doors opened with a soft, mechanical hush, and cool night air greeted him outside. Behind him, music slowly resumed, uncertain at first, then louder, as if the band had been instructed to drown the discomfort. Inside, the celebration attempted to recover. Outside, the sky had begun to drizzle. Thomas stood beneath the awning for a moment, staring at nothing. He had imagined many versions of this day: pride, tears, joy. He had never imagined becoming a footnote in his own daughter's story. Rain dotted his jacket. He descended the steps alone. Back inside, Emily placed the envelope on the gift table without opening it. Probably a sentimental letter. She muttered lightly to Daniel. Richard smiled. "I'm sure it's heartfelt." She lifted her champagne again, determined not to let the mood slip. But somewhere deep inside her, beneath the satin and applause, a small, uncomfortable tremor had begun. She didn't know why. She hadn't yet opened the envelope, and she didn't yet understand that the quiet man who had just walked out of her life had never been small. The real silence was still waiting, and when it arrived, it would not whisper. It would break everything. The music returned, but it no longer sounded joyful. It sounded forced, violin strings stretched too tight, laughter half a second too loud, conversations that stumbled and restarted. Emily felt it, that invisible shift in the air. Still, she refused to acknowledge it. "Let's not make this dramatic," she said lightly to Daniel as she adjusted her veil. "He's always been sensitive," Daniel nodded, though his smile lacked conviction. Across the room, Richard Lawson leaned toward one of his associates, but his eyes occasionally drifted toward the ballroom doors where Thomas had disappeared. The gift table stood near the stage, stacked with silver, apt boxes, envelopes, ribbons, and congratulatory cards. Emily walked toward it. "If we don't open at least a few now, people will insist," she said, forcing a playful tone. A small crowd gathered again. Curiosity is stronger than discomfort. She picked up the envelope. It was plain. No gold trim, no embossed initials, just her name written in her father's careful handwriting. For a fraction of a second, her fingers hesitated. Then she broke the seal. Inside were several sheets of paper. Not a letter. Documents. Her smile thinned. "What is it?" Daniel asked. Probably something emotional. she replied dismissively. She unfolded the first page. The room slowly quieted again, not because anyone asked it to, but because instinct sensed something shifting. At the top of the page, ***, property transfer agreement, ***, below that, a list of commercial properties. Industrial lots, residential developments, city blocks. Her eyes scanned the addresses. They were familiar. Too familiar. Richard stepped closer. His expression changed instantly. "Let me see that." She handed him the documents, confused. He read faster and paler. Attached were historical contracts, investment records, original purchase deeds dating back 30 years. Signed by one name, Thomas Hale. A second page outlined silent partnership agreements, capital injections made during the recession that had nearly destroyed Lawson Developments. A third document bore today's date. It stated in calm legal language that Thomas Hale was exercising full liquidation of his silent holdings and withdrawing financial backing from all subsidiary structures connected to Lawson Developments effective immediately. Effective immediately. The wedding venue, the catering company. The luxury condominium complex where Daniel and Emily planned to live. Even Daniel's executive position in the company. All financially entangled. All tied quietly to Thomas. A final sheet slid from the envelope and drifted to the floor. Emily bent to pick it up. This one was handwritten. She recognized the pen, recognized the steady, patient strokes. "Emily, all my life, I tried to give you what you needed, not what would impress the world, but what would protect you from it. You once told me you wished for a different father. I understood. So today, I am giving you exactly what you asked for: independence from mine. Everything connected to my name is now removed from yours. You are free to build your future without the shadow of the father you did not want. I hope he gives you everything I couldn't." Dad, the word Dad blurred. The edges of the room softened. Emily looked up. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the documents again. This isn't possible," Daniel whispered. But it was. Thomas had never been a mechanic who struggled to survive. He had been a man who chose simplicity, who invested quietly, who bought land when no one saw value, who rescued a failing company without demanding recognition, who remained invisible so others could appear powerful. Richard finally spoke, his voice stripped of its usual polish. He was the primary silent stakeholder. The words were heavy. He owned 41%. 41%. Not a minor investor, not a background donor, the foundation. The room buzzed. Guests leaned in, phones lowered. Smiles vanished. Emily's breathing became uneven. No, she whispered. This didn't match the narrative she had built in her mind. Her father was supposed to be small, ordinary, replaceable. Not this. Richard's jaw tightened. If these liquidation orders are processed tomorrow, our lines of credit collapse, the expansion projects freeze, Daniel's position. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Daniel stepped back as if the floor had shifted. Emily felt heat rush to her face. Memories collided violently. Her father coming home late, smelling of oil. Her father missing school events because of work. Her father counting cash at the kitchen table. She had thought it was survival. It had been strategy. Every sacrifice she had interpreted as limitation had been discipline. And she had mistaken quiet strength for weakness. The crowd was no longer pretending. Whispers sharpened. "Did you hear? He funded them. She said she wanted another father. How humiliating." Emily's vision narrowed. The chandelier lights above her flickered like distant stars. The paper in her hand crumpled slightly. Her knees weakened. Daniel reached for her. Emily, too late, the room tilted. Champagne glasses shattered as she collapsed, the handwritten letter slipping from her fingers. Gasps erupted. Someone called for medical assistance. Richard stood frozen, documents hanging uselessly at his side. For the first time in decades, he looked like a man who had miscalculated. Outside, several miles away, Thomas Hale drove slowly through the rain. His phone vibrated repeatedly on the passenger seat. He did not look at it. He had not designed the envelope for revenge. He had designed it for truth. Love does not beg to be chosen, and respect cannot be forced into existence. If she wanted a different father, he would no longer stand in the way of that dream. Behind him, the wedding unraveled into chaos. The empire trembled, and the daughter who had wished for a different father finally understood. She had just erased the only one who had quietly built her world. The wedding ended not with music, but with sirens. Champagne glasses lay shattered across marble floors. Guests clustered in uneasy circles, their elegant composure fractured by whispers that moved faster than any orchestra could silence. Emily was carried out beneath the same crystal chandeliers that had sparkled over her triumph only an hour earlier. Now they glared. Daniel followed the paramedics, pale and shaken. Richard Lawson remained standing near the gift table, the documents still clutched in his hand like evidence at a crime scene. For the first time in decades, the great Richard Lawson did not look powerful. He looked afraid. The collapse by morning, the story had traveled far beyond the ballroom. Not publicly, not in headlines, but in boardrooms, in private calls, in urgent messages between investors. Thomas Hale's liquidation order was real, banks confirmed it, lawyers confirmed it. Without his silent capital, several of Lawson Development's ongoing projects stalled immediately. Creditors grew cautious. Partners delayed signatures. Stocks dipped quietly. Daniel's executive contract, dependent on restructuring capital that now no longer existed, was under review. By noon, the honeymoon suite reservation had been canceled. By evening, 3 investors had requested emergency meetings. And in a quiet hospital room, Emily woke to the sound of machines humming steadily beside her. The realization, her throat felt dry. Her head heavy. The first thing she saw was Daniel sitting in a chair, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The second thing she noticed was the absence. No flowers from her father, no gentle voice asking if she was okay. Only silence where he used to be. Where is he? She asked faintly. Daniel didn't pretend not to understand. He left, the word lingered, left, not stormed out, not caused a scene, left. Emily turned her face toward the window. Rain traced slow paths down the glass. Memories came in pieces, her toast, the applause, the envelope. The letter, I hope he gives you everything I couldn't. Her chest tightened painfully. All those years she had interpreted his quietness as inadequacy. His worn suits as failure, his long hours as smallness. She had compared him to men who stood on foundations he had poured. And worst of all, she had humiliated him publicly, not in private frustration, not in youthful anger. But deliberately, with a microphone, Daniel spoke carefully. My father is trying to reach him. Emily closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she understood something devastating. Her father had never competed. He had never defended himself. He had simply allowed her to believe whatever made her happiest, even if it made him smaller in her eyes. That was not weakness, that was love. The visit 3 days later. Emily stood in front of the small house she grew up in. It looked exactly the same, modest, neat, unimpressive to strangers, sacred to her. Her hands trembled as she knocked. No answer, she knocked again. Silence, her heart pounded. A neighbor stepped outside across the street. Oh, the elderly woman said gently, You must be Emily. Yes, is my dad home? The woman hesitated. He left yesterday morning, packed light, said he needed some time away. Emily felt the ground shift beneath her again. Did he say where? The neighbor shook her head softly, just smiled, said, Tell her I'm proud of the woman she's becoming. Proud. Even now, Emily's knees weakened, but she stayed standing. The neighbor handed her a small envelope. He asked me to give you this if you came. Her fingers recognized the weight instantly. Inside was a single photograph. Cracked slightly at the edges from years of being handled. It was a crayon drawing, a small stick, figure girl holding hands with a taller figure in blue. Above them, uneven letters read, ***, my daddy, my hero. *** on the back, in Thomas's steady handwriting, "You don't owe me admiration. Just live kindly, that will be enough. No anger, no accusations, no demand for apology, just dignity." That hurt more than punishment ever could. The shift weeks passed. The business restructuring was brutal. Richard Lawson managed to salvage portions of his company, but not without selling assets and surrendering control to external partners. The empire no longer felt invincible. Daniel changed too, without guaranteed status, without the certainty of inherited dominance. He seemed smaller somehow, more human. And Emily began volunteering quietly at a community legal center that assisted single parents with financial literacy and property rights. She never announced it, never posted about it. She simply showed up. One evening, months later, her phone buzzed with an unknown international number. Her heart skipped. She answered. Silence at first, then a familiar voice. "Hi, kiddo." The word broke her. "Dad," she whispered. There were 1,000 things she had rehearsed saying, apologies, explanations. Self-blame, none of them came out correctly. Instead, she said the only honest thing, "I was wrong." On the other end, a soft exhale. "I know," he replied gently, no triumph, no bitterness, just acceptance. "Are you coming home?" she asked. A pause. "Home isn't a place," he said quietly. "It's people who choose each other." Her breath caught. "I choose you," she said, voice shaking. This time the silence felt different, not empty, considering. "We'll see," he answered. "Build something good first for yourself, not to impress anyone." The line clicked softly. Not an ending, not yet a reunion, but not a good bye either. The quiet revenge in the end. Thomas Hale's revenge was never about money. It was about revelation. He didn't destroy her life. He removed himself from the illusion that he was replaceable. He let the world see what she had refused to, and when she collapsed, it wasn't from loss of wealth. It was from the unbearable weight of understanding. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is not humiliation. It is dignity. And sometimes the deepest betrayal is not wishing for a different father. It is realizing too late that the one you had was extraordinary. Far away, on a quiet coastline, where the waves erased footprints as quickly as they were made, Thomas stood watching the horizon. He was no longer the silent investor, no longer the overlooked mechanic, no longer the father trying to prove his worth. He was simply a man who had loved fully, and finally chose himself.